Welcome to our first season of the podcast, Grow from Darkness. We are your hosts, Amanda Blackwood.
And Chrysanthi Dokos from Coast to Coast. As some of our listeners know, we're both survivors of complex trauma, and it's our mission to help others experiencing similar issues.
This season, we're going to be digging into trauma reactions, their long term consequences, and how we fight back to live our best lives.
Hi, Amanda. It's so wonderful to speak with you again from the other side of the world. How are you today?
Fantastic. And how are you doing?
I'm doing really well as well. Yeah, it's a beautiful day here today. We've got mid-autumn happening while you've got mid-spring happening, haven't you?
Yes. And of course, since our podcasts are recorded in advance, and this one is actually airing on June 27th.
Woohoo!
Yeah, I know. I love being have the schedule up where I can see it. This is going to be just a couple of days after a women's empowerment event I'm going to be speaking at. So this is really definitely a good thing for us to be talking about today, is about the people pleasing aspect of this, because I think some of those people from that women's empowerment group, it's called From Battered to Brave. I think they can get a lot of understanding about what it means to be able to stand up for themselves from understanding the people pleasing aspects of a trauma response.
Absolutely. And I've been again doing a lot of research because I like to come prepared for our talks about people pleasing. And one of the really interesting things that over the years that I've been looking at trauma, the research shows that people pleasing is actually one of the 4 ways in which we respond to threat. So we've got, the traditional fight, flight response, and then freeze. And the 4th one is called fawning, which is where people pleasing comes under.
Yes. It's also referred to by a lot of survivors of human trafficking as the fight, flight, freeze, or please.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
I always kind of liked that. That's very much kind of universal. Because it is. That's exactly what fawning is. It's the people pleasing. It's the I'm going to do whatever it takes to make this person happy over here so that they don't get angry and upset at me and I survive this situation. It's a perfectly normal response when you're in it, but it shouldn't stay that way.
Exactly. So essentially what you're doing is you're consistently abandoning your own needs for the other person. To avoid conflict or criticism or disapproval or abuse. So in order to stay safe, what people do in those situations is to create a situation where they're just making sure that they're pleasing the other person so that they don't feel unsafe.
Right. Have you had moments where you can recall that you've had to do?
Oh yeah, definitely. Look, I have used people pleasing as my modus operandi most of my life. Because one of the other things that has been really interesting in my research is that we learn often these behaviours during childhood. So if we've had a childhood where we've experienced neglect or chaos, through, say, domestic violence or abuse in the family, this is a learned behaviour that becomes so ingrained because we want to keep the peace. And we learn that, in order to keep the peace, we've got to be perfect. And in order, being perfect means pleasing the person who we find threatening. And it was really interesting. One of the things that I discovered that fawning or people pleasing might look like is actually pursuing a career primarily to please your parents.
That's
when I
interesting. I've seen that happen a
it
lot.
isn't that fascinating? And when I read that, I thought, "Oh my goodness, that is so me, so me." So that's my first example, um, because, like, my parents came from, a poverty-stricken background and worked hard to earn enough money to send me off to college. And, my dad actually wanted me to be a doctor or a dentist, because he thought that that was the way I'd make the most amount of money. I still went to university and became a teacher, which he was proud of. But even till his dying day, he said, "You should have been a doctor or a dentist."
Huh.
So, you know, I even now that I'm telling this story, my stomach is churning because I feel like I let him down.
Really?
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
you've done with your life is so admirable.
Oh, I know. I know. Like, my mum was so proud of me becoming a teacher and having as she would say, a paper in my hand, the diploma or degree.
Yeah.
And I remember her at my graduation, she was just beaming, that
Oh,
I was the first person in my family, extended family, to actually go to college or university and get a degree as a female. My cousin was a male who did that, but the first female.
wow. That's
Um,
pretty cool. See there yet again, more reasons to be proud of everything that you've done and accomplished. You're incredible.
I know. No, but quite going back to our topic, we honestly, we always go off topic when we talk about our personal examples. Um, the thing was that I was talking about is that, pursuing a certain career basically to please your parents, and that comes back to what I was saying earlier. Depending on the kind of childhood that you've had, those people pleasing behaviors and belief systems are almost like imprinted into your DNA, that this is how you need to relate to other people. The only way that you're
Right.
going to get love and feel secure in a friendship or relationship is by pleasing the other person.
Right.
And I've done that so much in my interpersonal relationships to the point of being abused.
Right. Yeah. Me too. I mean, it's such a behavior pattern that we build because we repeat it so often when we're put in that situation. It it does bleed over into pretty much every other area of our lives because one, we've gotten really good at it.
Yeah.
And two, it helps us to avoid that nasty little thing called confrontation.
Yep. Yep.
We don't want
Yep.
to have to get into a fight. I mean, people pleasing very helpful when it came to certain career choices of mine. For
Mhm.
example, when I was a flight attendant,
Yeah.
that's it's one of those things that you have to have is a people pleasing kind of mentality. It's the same thing with being a nurse, being a caretaker of any kind.
Yeah.
There are people pleasers all over the planet, and
Absolutely.
most of them have experienced trauma of some sort, and that's what kind of pushes them into this area.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
think I've ever met a therapist. I think I've said this on another episode. I don't think I've ever met a therapist that didn't have a therapist.
Exactly. 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 But maybe, I might just list a couple of things that, look like people pleasing, just so our listeners can get an idea of what that means,
Yeah.
what the behaviours are. So, being excessively nice and complimentary,
Mhm.
that's one. Being overly concerned with another person's happiness, sort of above your own. Waiting for cues in conversation to determine if something was safe to share or to disclose. So being really hyper vigilant.
I do that a lot. I still do that.
Mhm. Mhm. So, yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it? And so essentially, I was reading an article by a guy called Sam Finch, and he was saying, I love this phrase, he said, you could say that people pleasers are sort of emotional chameleons trying to blend in order to feel safe.
Emotional chameleons.
Yeah, yeah.
I like that phrase enough that I may have to steal that.
I know, isn't it amazing? When I first read that, I thought, whoa, it was almost like somebody hit me in the face with that, because it's exactly what people pleasing is.
Right.
Because you just, it boils down to that sense of self again that we've talked about in other episodes. When we're not people who have been traumatized, feel insecure in their attachments to other people. When it's sort of starting in our childhood,
Right.
and those attachments are based on our capacity to feel safe and therefore people please, and we shut down our own emotional responses because we've grown up in controlling or chaotic environments, and
Yeah.
we don't have that secure love and attachment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And people pleasing, I've heard a lot of people describe it as being the opposite of angry or aggressive behavior,
Mm-hmm.
which I think that's really interesting because both of them are quite separate. You can be extremely angry, but still be a people pleaser.
Yeah.
You can be absolutely both at the same time. And it can be very confusing to try and understand what you're feeling while all of
Yeah.
this is going on. You're just
Yeah.
not letting anybody see what you're really feeling.
Exactly. I mean, you're angry because you're not happy with the situation, and that might come out as aggression, but at the same time, you desperately want peace, and so your behavior doesn't reflect the anger. Your behavior reflects that deep inner need for peace, no conflict, and to feel loved and attached to the other person.
Right, which also gets into the world of codependency. You get some
Mm-hmm.
very unhealthy relationships.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. And which can lead then to abusive relationships.
Yep. Well, I mean, at that point, you are depending on that person for your own sense of self worth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not a fun place to be.
No.
Yeah.
No, and that sort of segues into what I wanted to just bring up, in that, if you have a tendency to people please, what you're basically doing is making yourself subordinate to the other person.
Right.
You're trying to make yourself smaller, and essentially you're ignoring your boundaries and your intuition, that gut feeling, and basically minimizing your needs. And that's what makes us emotionally vulnerable to emotional abuse.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
So I've learned in some of my research and study that a lot of times people um, grow up in a world of shame or abuse.
yeah,
They learn a perception of needing to behave a particular way to avoid further abuse or treatment. We were
yeah,
talking about that.
yeah.
Um, they feel the drive to kind of pander to their abusers or their caregivers' needs to stop, what's going on,
Mm,
but this stops the trauma survivor from forming healthy emotions of their own.
mm,
This can actually cut them off from their own feelings completely.
yeah.
So, and a lot of trauma survivors, because of this, they develop a heightened sense of awareness to the moods of the people
Mm,
around them. And
mhm.
sometimes this is mistaken for empathy or being extremely empathetic, when reality it's a heightened sense of awareness.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it can be really unhealthy for people. I mean, have you ever sat in a room and you can just feel the person and you know that whatever's going on with them ain't none of it good and you don't want a
Oh,
part of it?
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Definitely, I can say yes to that. And I am certainly one of those. I fit into that category completely of being hyper vigilant or hyper aware of other people's vibe, as I call it. Um, you can just sense it. You
Yeah.
know, yeah. And I had a situation last year when I walked into a room or a space. Actually, it wasn't in a room, it was a space with some other women. And I could just feel the negativity oozing. And I thought, oh, this isn't good. And we'd planned to go on a trip together, a day trip. And as the day unfolded, negative things kept happening, and I thought, why didn't I just listen to my intuition and just go? You know?
Right.
Um, so yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. I've experienced so many times over and over.
Yeah, and it's a horrible thing to feel and to have to address the fact that the reason that you're feeling this isn't because you have this magical sense of empathy, but rather because you've experienced that pain and
Mm,
you know what that feeling is that you're sensing, and that tension is thick.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly, exactly. I think one thing to maybe point out for our listeners, Amanda, is that people pleasing isn't necessarily a thing that's going to happen if you have, a traumatic event, a one-off traumatic event. This is something that is ingrained in people from a very young age. Or if they're in a like a situation where they've become overpowered by a person in their lives. It's very much a relational kind of behavior rather than something that's necessarily going to happen, if you've had a car accident and become a quadriplegic or whatever. It doesn't, that's a major trauma, huge trauma in one's life, but it's not going to necessarily lead to people pleasing.
Right. It's not a prolonged and repeated exposure to the trauma.
Mm,
And
mm.
that's going to be the biggest difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So
How are
some of
we
the
going
long term.
for time? Yeah, I was just thinking, how are we going for time?
Well, let's see. We've got about 12 minutes remaining of our 30. So we need to address long term consequences.
Yes. Yeah. Do you want to start us off on that?
Sure. There are definitely several long term effects of not keeping your people pleasing habits in check. Uh, Often, the people pleasers, the trauma can feel really resentful of the people that they're trying to please. Even if that person hasn't been their abuser, they can start to harbor resentment towards them. It's because they're not putting their own needs first, and they feel like they're not being appreciated for their efforts at people pleasing this other person.
Mm.
I did this a lot as a kid where I decided that whatever somebody else liked is what I was going to like or appreciate
Mm.
or enjoy,
Mhm.
um, because that was the only way I knew how to make friends. And eventually I got to where I resented those friends and didn't want to hang out with them anymore because they didn't do any of the things that I like to do. But how are they going to know what I like to do if I don't even know what I like to do?
I
So,
think that's a really interesting one because it goes back to something we said earlier in the episode about not not actually developing a sense of self.
right,
If so during our childhoods where this sort of very chaotic stuff has been happening, you don't develop your emotional literacy or understanding of your emotions because you haven't really had an opportunity to just be you, just explore who that wonderful human being is.
right, right. And it's so important that we do understand these things about us because otherwise it's going to lead to resentment. Um,
Mm.
exhaustion, low
Mhm.
self-esteem, unhealthy relationships, social isolation. There's so many things that can happen because people don't take the time to understand who they are enough to stop the people-pleasing
Yeah.
behaviors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. So, I mean, though you've just summarized basically what the long-term consequences are.
I seem to be good at that.
You are. You are. So,
So,
essentially, what we're talking about is that, as adults, people who have learned this fawning response, this people-pleasing response, reach adulthood with, really a lot of problems regarding attachments with other people and not really understanding what a loving relationship looks like.
right. And what a nightmare that's going to be as you start searching more and more for that sense of connection. Because
Mhm.
no matter what, unless you learn how to fight against this people pleasing behavior, all of your connections are going to end up either codependent or um, aggressively abusive.
Can I put my hand up for that?
So, do you want to learn some really healthy ways of being able to fight pleasing personality?
Please.
All right. So, I have a list this time.
Yoo-hoo.
So, the first one is identify your triggers.
Mhm.
What situations or people make you feel the need to please them? Once you
Mm.
know your triggers, you can start to develop strategies for coping with them.
Mhm.
So, one of my triggers is tension or the, how do I put it? The holding of affection.
Mm.
That's a huge trigger for me. If I feel like I've tried to hold somebody's hand or kiss them on a cheek and they pushed me away,
Yeah.
everything for me crumbles and I spend the next who knows how many hours trying to fix the situation when in reality it might just be that whoever that person was, my husband, was busy or thinking about something else at the moment and had no idea that I even tried to hold his hand. So I have to identify that and recognize that my husband would never intentionally just push me away.
Mm.
So
Mm.
that's the big one for to start. The next one is to practice saying no. This is so difficult to do at first, but the more we practice it, the better we get at it. Um, it's important to learn to set these boundaries. If you're asked to do something you don't want to do, it's okay to say no. And a great way to start practicing this, I've learned, is if you sit down with a friend. I learned this from one of my podcast guests on one of my other my other podcast. Um, Sit down with somebody that you're friends with and that knows that you are trying to break this habit. Have them ask you to do things, and you have the requirement to say no to every single one of the things they ask you to do. Simple things, little things, things that wouldn't take you very long or very much effort to do. No. Hey, can you hand me that pen? No. Something as simple as that. It can be so insanely hard to say that first no. It can come out very quiet, very mellow, very questioning. Every no comes out as a no. But eventually, you kind of start building up that strength to where someday when somebody else asks you if you want to do something or if you could do something or if you will do something for them and it's something you don't want to do, it's a whole lot easier to just say,
Mm.
no,
Mm.
nope.
And I think one of the key things is for people to understand that it's okay to feel really bad when you say no, because that's essentially what's happening. We're not used to saying no. And, you said it's the first time you say it, it's going to be really hard. It's going to be weak. And
Right.
that's okay
Yep.
because it's a skill that you're learning. It's a new skill that you're
Oh,
learning.
yeah. And not only is it a skill that you're learning, but it goes against everything you were ever, and I will put this correctly, trained to do.
Yeah.
because what you've done is not learned responses that were healthy. You were trained by somebody else to do as they wanted you to do.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's sort of, it's not just a skill development, but it's also retraining our belief systems.
Right. Right. And it can be really frustrating and it can be a bit of a process. But when you learn how to do this, you learn how to be a little bit more assertive. And that's another key factor to fighting back against your people pleasing behaviors.
Yeah.
Assertiveness is the ability to express your needs and wants in a clear and direct way. So it's also important to study and understand what your needs and wants are. It's
Yes.
important to be assertive in order to set the boundaries that you need so that you can get your needs met.
Yes. Yeah.
Another really important thing to do is to accept that you cannot please everyone. And there are those of us out there, I will raise my hand on this one, who in the past made it an absolute life mission to please everyone. I broke company records for passenger compliments when I was a flight attendant. These days, I would probably tell some of those people to shove their dirty, stinky, non-sock wearing feet right up where the sun don't shine. I don't want to see them. I
Yeah.
mean, accepting that you can't please everybody doesn't mean that you should be rude or inconsiderate to them, even though
Absolutely
I
not.
just outlined that I probably would to some of them. But it doesn't mean that you should, feel the need to be liked by everyone
No.
either. And
No.
a lot of us grow up with that, even if we're not in abusive households, because that's what we want more than anything when we're in school. We
Mhm.
want to be popular, we want to be liked by everyone. It's not possible.
No, I mean, the bottom line is you don't like everybody, so how is it that you expect everybody to like you?
Right, right. Yeah.
So
And it's the same thing with getting a therapist too.
mm,
Yeah, and that's another really good key that you can do to help fight your people pleasing behaviors is talk about this with a medical professional, a therapist, a counselor. Um, if you find a therapist that you don't get along with, it's okay. You can go get
mhm,
another one. You
mhm.
know, sticking around with a therapist or a counselor that you don't get along with, you don't mesh well with, you don't trust, you don't want to talk to, you don't like, you think that the wart on the side of their nose is too big, any number of reasons that you might not like that person, it's okay to take a step back and say, if I stick with this person, it's because I have people pleasing behaviors and that's what I'm trying to address. So I need to find a new therapist.
Mm, mm, exactly. So, in summary, it seems to me that with everything that we've talked about today, it all comes back down to sense of self.
Yes.
And one of the key things about recovery from trauma is, you know, developing a strong sense of self, because these boundaries are not going to happen. This people pleasing behavior isn't going to change if our belief systems about ourselves don't change. If we don't
Right.
feel we're worthy, we're not going to assert ourselves.
Right.
And one of the hardest things to believe when you've been in situations like this and lived fairly traumatic childhoods is that that self-worth and that belief in oneself can be really compromised.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and aren't we tired of feeling like everything in our life is compromised?
Yeah, absolutely.
We've been there
Absolutely.
our whole lives. It's time to change these patterns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So it seems like that we've come to the end, I think, Amanda. Is there anything else that we need to cover?
Just what it is that we're going to be talking about next week.
I've
Do you know what
forgotten.
that one is?
I've forgotten. I've got my list in front of me.
Next week is the need for control.
Oh, yes. It's part of what people pleasing is, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Which is why I wanted to do people pleasing before doing the need for control.
Yeah.
And they're very connected.
You're so sensible.
Sometimes. Sometimes. I don't know if I'm going to be picking a therapist based on the size of the mole on the side of their nose, then I think I might have some deeper seated issues still.
Oh, you're nuts. Well, thanks, Amanda. I've really enjoyed our conversation today. I hope our listeners have got something out of it, understood what people pleasing is, what it looks like, how it can affect us long term, and what we can do to overcome it. So thanks again,
Yes.
and we'll talk next time about controlling behaviour.
You can find out more about Growth from Darkness through the website www.growthfromdarkness.com. You can also learn more through the Facebook page, which can be found at facebook.com/growthfromdarkness. Thank you.